Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. Most of us have never heard of Ayurveda. Though it is a healing tradition that goes back thousands of years, how might it help us today? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Today we're talking with Dr. Kulreet Chaudhry. When she started medical school, she wasn't thinking at all of the healing traditions of her heritage, but her own experience brought her back to Ayurvedic medicine. She explains the principles.
Really, the fundamental concept is food is medicine, and health is the result of a combination of different dietary and other lifestyle practices.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, discover how Dr. Kulreet Chaudhry integrated Ayurvedic medicine into her neurology practice.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, a new evaluation of old data suggests that seniors shouldn't count on statins to prolong their lives. The research published in JAMA Internal Medicine was a post hoc analysis of records from the ALLHAT trial of treating high blood pressure and elevated cholesterol. The 6 years of ALLHAT ended in 2002. Statistical analysis of the data for participants over 65 and for those over 75 years old showed that those taking pravastatin were no more likely to survive the trial than those on usual care. In fact, among the oldest volunteers, those on pravastatin were more likely to perish than those in the control group, although the difference was not statistically significant. The rates of heart attacks, angina, and stents were not significantly different between the groups. The authors conclude, no benefit was found when pravastatin was given for primary prevention to older adults with moderate hyperlipidemia and hypertension, and a non-significant direction toward increased all-cause mortality with pravastatin was observed among adults 75 years and older. An accompanying editorial points out that older individuals may be more vulnerable to possible statin side effects of muscle and joint pain and weakness. It recommends that doctors consider the possible risks carefully before prescribing a statin for an older patient.
Women who want to avoid breast cancer should go easy on the alcohol, according to a new report. The American Institute for Cancer Research and the World Cancer Research Fund collaborated on a systematic review of 119 studies. There were 12 million women included in the analysis. 1 drink a day, equivalent to a beer or a small glass of wine, raised the risk of breast cancer by roughly 5% in premenopausal women and 9% in postmenopausal women. Exercise, on the other hand, lowered the risk for developing breast cancer. Premenopausal women who were very active reduced their risk of breast cancer by 17%. Postmenopausal women who exercised vigorously lowered their risk by 10%.
The Danish Diet, Cancer and Health Study has turned up an interesting observation. People who eat chocolate are less likely to develop atrial fibrillation, a heart rhythm abnormality that affects between 2 and 6 million Americans. Atrial fibrillation, or AFib, is associated with a greater chance of stroke, cognitive decline, and heart failure. The Danish study included 55,502 men and women who answered detailed questionnaires about their food consumption at the beginning of nearly 14 years of follow-up. During that time, participants experienced 3,346 cases of atrial fibrillation. Those who ate an ounce of chocolate at least once a month were 10% less likely to develop AFib. Those who consumed chocolate every week had a 17% lower risk, while those who had 2 to 6 servings a week lowered their risk by about 20%. There was no benefit to eating more than 6 servings weekly. Epidemiological studies like this one can't establish cause and effect. Other studies have shown that cocoa flavonoids in chocolate relax blood vessels and lower blood pressure, keep platelets from clotting inappropriately, and reduce the risk of dementia. The investigators on the Danish Diet, Cancer, and Health study point out that European chocolate is higher in cocoa than many popular American chocolates. So, while you can't count on chocolate to help your heart, you needn't feel guilty about munching a small amount of dark chocolate at least once a week.
Lots of parents think of fruit juice as a healthy beverage for babies and children. Now, pediatricians say don't fill the sippy cups with juice drinks for little ones less than a year old. The problem is that fruit drinks can cause weight gain, diarrhea, or cavities. If babies are already used to drinking juice, the doctors suggest gradually cutting it with water. The American Academy of Pediatrics has issued a new policy recommending that infants under a year old should not drink fruit juice unless the doctor recommends it as a way to fight constipation. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Americans have embraced yoga for its physical, mental, and spiritual benefits. But another ancient healing practice from India has been virtually ignored. Ayurvedic medicine has been practiced for over 5,000 years, but it remains mysterious to most Americans.
To help us understand more about this ancient healing tradition from India, we turn to Dr. Kulreet Chowdhury. She's an integrative neurologist who's combined her expertise in modern neurology and ancient Ayurvedic medicine. She's the author of The Prime, Prepare and Repair Your Body for Spontaneous Weight Loss.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Kulreet Chowdhury.
It is such a pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you for joining us. You write in your book about moving from India to the United States and how it eventually had a rather negative impact on your health. Can you start first by giving us just a little background? What was it like in India when you were a young girl? And then how did changing your diet impact your overall health in the U.S.?
It would be a pleasure. I think the biggest difference was in India, there's a real lack, or at least there was at that time, of processed food. And so this new trend of farm to table was really the only option that you had there. And so all of our meals were freshly prepared using completely natural ingredients and all of the rich spices that so many people are familiar with in Indian culture, like turmeric, cumin, coriander. And so there was really not even the option of having processed foods or foods with artificial ingredients. And when I came here, suddenly there was this really kind of entire new palette of food that was just wrapped in different type of plastics or bags that, you didn't have to go to your local farmer to get. And over time, as I started to introduce what, I now refer to as these new-to-nature foods, it started to have a really detrimental effect on my body.
Well, I can imagine being a teenager in the U.S. and wanting to blend in and eat all the junk food that your friends were eating. And then, of course, when you got to medical school, we're talking intense. There's not a lot of time to prepare food. And so as a result, you were probably caught up in the process of any normal American kid eating what they loved and what their friends were eating.
That's exactly right. And especially as a teenager, up until that point, my parents still made a pretty strong effort to holding us to the traditional Indian diet. But once you become a teenager, it's just natural to rebel. And one of the ways that I rebelled was by eating kind of this new, exciting food that gave you that immediate rush. And it's exactly as you said, once I got to medical school, I was happy to have showered, on a daily basis. And food was really a pure act of convenience. And Unfortunately, that is the relationship that most of us in America have to food. It's just simply an act of convenience, not really a way that we nurture ourselves.
And of course, in medical school, nobody thought that was weird.
No, in medical school, when you're walking around half asleep most of the time and you're just thrilled that you even had a chance to stop and eat, it became the norm. And that norm in medical school really set me up for my habits once I completed my medical training. And I said, unfortunately, those bad habits that I developed during my medical training were pretty much status quo for the majority of people, even though they hadn't ever gone through something like medical training.
I found it kind of fascinating that when you first started medical school, you started asking questions, about diet and digestion and issues that were of interest to you. And you were shut down pretty quickly, and you began to, pardon the pun, swallow hook, line, and sinker the superior knowledge of the Western approach to health. Tell us about that.
That's exactly right. Growing up, it wasn't even considered medical knowledge because there really wasn't this divorce of nutrition and overall health in the Indian culture. At least that's how it was when I was growing up. That's certainly changed now. And so there was just all of these little tidbits of knowledge that we just all had. We understood that what you ate affected your health. And then suddenly to be immersed into medical school where, you got sick based on something that happened in a particular biochemical pathway. And we never looked at the habits. And that was so foreign to me at first. But asking these why questions of, well, how did this person get sick? Why did they get sick? Was something that was just totally unacceptable. And this whole idea, which of course now is becoming widely proven even in medicine, of lifestyle impacting health, that was still something that was completely new at that time. So you're right. I basically said, okay, this must be an archaic way of thinking that what you eat, the way you sleep, exercise, all of these things have a profound impact on your health.
Well, and after you graduated from medical school, you then went on to specialize. You did a residency in neurology, which doesn't seem to have anything to do with what we eat, right? But in The Prime, your book, you describe what happened as you started your practice. Would you tell us about that, please?
Absolutely. And this was the biggest surprise for me as a neurologist because just as you said, we tend to look at the brain as the organ that seems to be least affected by your digestive system. And, of course, we're starting to discover the exact opposite now. But I, being a good student of neurology, put all of that knowledge that I grew up with aside. And as I started to practice neurology, I actually developed debilitating migraine headaches. And my initial reaction to that was, essentially, it's no big deal. I'm a neurologist. I know all the medications I need to prescribe in order to treat this. And I couldn't get my own migraines under control. And that was a real fork in the road for me, personally, from my health perspective, but also professionally, because I was a neurologist and I couldn't treat a condition that I was technically trained for. And this was the point where I came back to my roots as a child of looking at diet and so forth. And of course, I went to my mom because everything else failed. I went to all the doctors. And so what do? I went back to my mom and said, I can't function with these headaches anymore. And she reintroduced me to Ayurvedic medicine.
Well, now, what I found so interesting, and we study drugs, that's sort of what we do, especially as a pharmacologist. That's the wheelhouse that I am involved in. I'd never heard the term Dopamax. So your patients were complaining to you about the drugs that you were prescribing to them for their migraines. Tell us about Dopamax and your personal experience and why people refer to it as Dopamax.
It's a very humbling experience to become a patient because until you are a patient, everything that we see as, one of a myriad of side effects listed for a medication they seem insignificant. But when you become a patient and you're actually experiencing that, it takes over your entire life. And I had heard this term over and over from my patients and, had kind of laughed it off as well, saying, oh, come on, but, we've got your headaches under better control. That's all that matters. And it really comes from this inability to think properly and especially finding words. And as, a young, bright physician, when you're not able to think properly or find words, that interrupts your ability to be able to care for patients. So I was on that medication for an extremely short period and then fully appreciated why my patients were calling it Dopamax.
Absolutely. Now, you say your mother reintroduced you to Ayurvedic medicine. She'd had a little experience or maybe a lot of experience with it herself. What did you think when she brought you to see an Ayurvedic practitioner?
Well, Ayurvedic medicine, the way that it's practiced in India, it's really just a part of the way that you eat. And that's why it was something I had taken for granted, because that's really the basis of Ayurvedic medicine, is that food is medicine. And so it was so much a part of kind of the subconscious decisions in the way that we prepared foods that I hadn't really thought of it as actual medicine that was preventing disease. And so once I, was in the situation where I basically couldn't treat myself, my colleagues couldn't help me, I came back to her and she reintroduced me to an Ayurvedic practitioner who was here in America. And my immediate response was, cynicism. I mean, how could I not be cynical after all of the training I had received? And I had been convinced that my diet had nothing to do with it. And here, this gentleman, the first thing he told me was that my headaches were due to my poor digestion and that my eating habits and my lifestyle habits were contributing to, my migraine syndrome. And that was heresy. I had heard nothing like that in my entire career as a medical student and as a resident and then as a physician. So if I wasn't so desperate, I wouldn't have been so open to another way of looking at my headaches.
When you first saw this Ayurvedic healer, he was dressed in traditional Indian garb, and it's my recollection that what you said was, oh boy, here we go. What did you mean by that?
Well, suddenly, Ayurvedic medicine seemed like something that was as foreign as it could possibly get, and I thought it would be totally irrelevant to my life because this gentleman in front of me looked like he was coming from, another planet. And I was so dead wrong.
You're listening to Dr. Kulreet Chowdhury, co-founder of Habit Change and Chief Medical Officer for New Practices Incorporated. She's a neuroscientist and a neurologist who has integrated the principles of Ayurvedic medicine into her practice. Her book is The Prime, Prepare and Repair Your Body for Spontaneous Weight Loss.
After the break, Dr. Chowdhury tells us about her experience using Ayurvedic healing for her own headaches.
What were the critical changes in diet?
Find out why you should make time for lunch.
We'll get an overview on Ayurvedic medicine.
And we'll learn more about the Ayurvedic proverb, what you eat becomes your mind.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. This is show number 1033. That number again, 800-732-2334, or find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're discussing how a conventionally trained neurologist discovered the benefits of an ancient Indian healing tradition called Ayurveda.
Our guest is Dr. Kulreet Chowdhury. She's an integrative neurologist and former director of Wellspring Health at Scripps Memorial Hospital. She's author of The Prime.
Dr. Chowdhury, can you fill us in on what happened next? In other words, here you are, Ayurvedic healer, completely out of your realm. You've been to medical school. You've gone to UCSD, University of California, San Diego, for your neurology residence. But you're desperate. Your migraines are just killers. And now you're being told you gotta change what you're eating. What happened?
What happened next was a total shock to me. And honestly, if I wasn't a patient, if I wasn't on the other side of the stethoscope, I would have never embraced kind of the eureka moment that came afterwards. And that was that as soon as I started working on my digestion, and this was with a combination of some herbal supplements, which really they're just simply food grade supplements, as well as some dietary recommendations that he gave me. Within a few months, and I was about 3 to 4 to be exact, I was completely headache free. And I had no basis for understanding this. And it wasn't even my expectation. I was hoping that they would maybe get a little bit less severe. But it didn't stop there. After being completely headache-free over the next few months, my energy level went up, my mental clarity improved. All of these problems that I didn't even know that I had suddenly began to dissipate. And the assumptions that I think so many of us make that, oh, this is just because I'm getting older and, this is just kind of a normal part of life. All of those assumptions about myself, my personality, my health, they just started to dissolve because they were clearly all an abnormal way to get older.
Well, how were you eating? What was the transformation? If we were to watch the pre-Ayurveda Dr. Chowdhury's diet and lifestyle, and then the post-Ayurvedic approach, what was the difference? How much of a change did you make?
Well, the pre-Ayurvedic Dr. Chowdhury, I didn't think I was eating that bad, but that's just kind of, unfortunately, it's just telling us how poorly most of us eat, that because all of our colleagues and friends are eating the same way, that we don't even consider it as unhealthy. But typically, I would be rushing through breakfast. I would just grab something, and it would typically be, some kind of a processed carbohydrate like a bagel. I would skip through lunch completely because I was seeing patients, and that's where we would add our emergencies. And then, I was eating out a lot, and I thought I was making healthy choices, eating noodles and other processed carbohydrates at dinner time, or throwing something together really quickly, again, a whole lot of processed foods. And after the Ayurvedic consultation, and this was the great part, it did not happen overnight. Many of the supplements that he started me on, they started to change my gut flora. So they started to actually change the bacteria that were living in my GI tract, and my tastes began to naturally change. And foods that were acceptable to me before suddenly started to feel toxic. So it's like I was waking up to the impact that the foods were having, and then I was spontaneously starting to change what I was putting in my mouth. And a big difference was not skipping lunch. I cannot believe how critical that was to have that meal in the middle of the day.
So you somehow found time in a busy practice schedule to make time for lunch, and it wasn't lunch on the fly from a vending machine.
No. And here was the amazing thing. I was having easily 15-hour days. I was a young physician, just took over a practice, and so I was having to assume all of these responsibilities, kind of what we're all doing, right? We're juggling multiple different responsibilities on a daily basis. What I found was the degree of inefficiency in my thinking when I was living like that and eating the wrong way was costing me time. And suddenly what it was taking me like 15 hours a day to do, my days just got shorter and shorter. I was seeing the problems way ahead of time. Instead of, having something come to me where I had to really struggle with figuring out how to answer an issue or how to deal with something, it was so much faster. And so the time that I was spending in preparing my fresh meals, that time was being multiplied in my day. And so even though I was putting time into taking care of myself, my overall day, my work day was getting shorter because I was becoming more efficient.
Dr. Chaudhry, we've been talking about an Ayurvedic approach to the problem that you had. I think many of our listeners are wondering, what the heck are they talking about? So please, can you tell us a little bit about Ayurvedic medicine?
Absolutely. It's actually the simplest possible approach to health, and it's the ancient healing system in India, over 5,000 years old. But it wasn't just native to India. What we have found is that as you go into the ancient cultures in multiple different countries, they all had a similar approach to health. And the basic premise is really very similar to the science of epigenetics that is now unfolding, which is that your environment, including what you put in your mouth, affects your body. And it can actually even change the way that your genes are being transcribed. So really the fundamental concept is food is medicine. And health is the result of a combination of different dietary and other lifestyle practices. And the other main concept in Ayurvedic medicine is that each one of us has an individual, unique blueprint, a mind-body type, which we refer to as dosha. That's the original Ayurvedic term. And once you know your mind-body type, you can take very prescriptive measures in terms of the way to eat, the way to live, that balance your particular body.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the dosha? How do you know what dosha you are and what it needs?
So the ideal way to do it is to actually see an Ayurvedic practitioner, because what they'll do is they'll take a detailed history, which is what I used to do when I was seeing patients, as well as doing your physical exam. And then there is a very critical diagnostic tool in Ayurvedic medicine called pulse diagnosis that gives us a deep understanding of an individual's dosha and also the dosha imbalance. But there are other ways to at least get an introduction to this. And in the book, we have a quiz, a dosha quiz that people can take. And these are a set of questions. And people are usually surprised because they're not just questions about your body, but they're questions about your personality, other traits that you have. And this gives you kind of a compilation, a picture of what type of dosha you may have. Even though it's not perfect, it's a really good introduction to get people going down that line.
And it's our understanding that once you know what your dosha is, then you can personalize your diet to match that. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely correct. And this is the critical step that we're learning even within kind of the modern integrative medical field, is that we really cannot give a one-size-fits-all prescriptive program. And this is what I loved as a patient of Ayurvedic medicine is, how you will hear like the next great thing and, this new trend of everybody should be eating this or everybody should be eating that, and then you'll adopt it and it works for your friend, but it doesn't work for you.
Absolutely.
And it will never work for everyone. And so knowing your dosha allows you to know what specifically you need to do. And I think this is one of the most overwhelming pieces for people is there's so much information out there. There are so many different recommendations. Should you be vegan? Should you be on the paleo diet? And how do you know what to do? And the dosha is essentially the key that you put in the lock to open the door to figure out what is right for you. And the best part is you don't have to do everything. You only have to do the things that are specific to your mind-body type.
Well, we were quite fascinated a few months ago when we encountered some Israeli research that looked at glycemic index and glycemic load, but specifically at glycemic index. And they had several hundred people involved in this research, ultimately. And they were looking at how people respond to specific foods. So we know that potatoes, for example, for some people will raise blood sugar and insulin very quickly. It turns out that for other people, they don't. And people
Exactly.
are very individual, which is
Yes.
kind of a real surprise. And kind of shouldn't be a surprise because we all have different gut flora, right?
Exactly. And this is essentially what the dosha is describing. And, it's funny because this whole new revolution in Western medicine, I should say modern medicine, it's not new at all. It really does go back to thousands of years ago. And it's this interplay between different foods, your own genetic predisposition, but we have all these clues. The way that you're built is a clue. Your temperament is a clue. And so these are all the clues of the phenotypic expression. And what that essentially means, it's the way that your unique genes interact with your environment. And even though Ayurvedic medicine didn't use the words, epigenetics or phenotypic expression, that's essentially what they were describing in the doshas. And what I'm starting to do now, and this is so funny, because instead of being surprised by it, we're taking that ancient knowledge and actually using the information that they understood way back then and studying it proactively. So knowing that people who have, let's say A, B, and C features, they should be more sensitive to potatoes, for example.
Well, I found it rather interesting that you say there is a common Ayurvedic phrase, what you eat becomes your mind. Now,
Yes.
You were trained as a neurologist, so, standard Western medicine, years of residency to qualify as a neurologist. And, here you are saying, wait a minute, the food you eat can actually affect your neurons.
Yes.
How do your colleagues deal with that concept?
Oh, how do I unload that question? It's changing. It was dealt with very differently 10 years ago when I started this. And the initial reaction is, you're practicing voodoo. But what we're now starting to understand is that this gut-brain connection, and specifically how the microbiome or the collection of bacteria affects brain function, that has really started to change the dialogue. Because 10 years ago, that research either wasn't available or it wasn't readily being discussed. And now 10 years later, there are so many people who are doing that research. We have studies not only in human beings, but in mice where you can say, well, let's take out, part of the placebo effect of this. And what we're seeing is it has an immediate impact on brain function. And so, we have this knowledge even in our own culture. You are what you eat, right? Well, what does that mean? Who are you? A lot of who you are just the thoughts that you're thinking, the way that you're perceiving the world. And what we're starting to realize is that food has such a direct impact on the bacteria that live in your gut. And those bacteria are such a huge source of information to your brain. They are actually the main source of serotonin, that feel-good hormone for your entire body. And so as we're starting to create the links, what we're realizing is that these aphorisms, these metaphors, are actually biological descriptions of what is happening in your body.
Let me start with the bacteria in our intestinal tracts and introduce another concept. Over the past 5 or 6 years, we have done a number of interviews with people who have introduced a concept of leaky gut syndrome, or to make it more medically acceptable, intestinal permeability, which apparently gastroenterologists now accept as a real thing.
Right. It's more scientific sounding than leaky gut.
Yeah, but let me tell you this, Dr. Chowdhury. I was with a group of very smart, very kind, very thoughtful physicians a couple weeks ago. And the question came up of, quote unquote, leaky gut. And they all laughed and poo-pooed it, pardon the pun. It was like, oh, that's just silly. That's voodoo. That's quackery.
So it seems as though, in addition to there being a connection between the gut and the brain, there's a connection potentially between our intestinal bacteria and our immune system.
But
Yes,
not too
very
many
much so.
colleagues of yours are yet ready to accept the idea of intestinal permeability. Help us understand
Yes,
what this is about.
But here's the thing. I come to the defense of those colleagues because I was one of them. And, I can't justify that I woke up with this brilliant notion one day. I woke up with migraine headaches. I woke up as a patient. And if I didn't find myself in that position, I would have no reason to question the medical education that I was given. And, this is human nature. You don't really change paradigms unless something forces you to change your thoughts around something. And so I'm not at all critical of those physicians because I would have had no reason to change myself had I not gotten sick. And that was forcing me into a position of having to look at the nervous system differently because my experience was so different. And you have to keep in mind throughout history, remember, it was laughable to think that the earth was round or that the earth might actually orbit the sun. So this is nothing new in history. We're constantly reinventing what we call truth.
When we speak about Ayurvedic medicine, I hope that you will tell us a little something about an herbal combination that you describe in your book, The Prime. It's called, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Trifala? Trifla. What is it?
Trifla is a combination of 3 berries, and it's one of my absolute favorite Ayurvedic herbs on the planet. And essentially, it just helps to heal the GI tract, and it helps to remove a lot of the toxins and waste products that are becoming accumulated in our body. But it does it in such a natural and effective and safe way. It's literally kind of the equivalent of, we think of the 3 berries that we're always eating in the U.S. and how much research and how much evidence is going towards, like, for example, the health benefits of blueberry. These are kind of the 3 berries of the East. And each one is amazing, but when you put them together, they're revolutionary.
You're listening to Dr. Kulreet Chowdhury. She's an integrative neurologist and neuroscientist who's been an investigator on studies of multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and diabetic peripheral neuropathy, among other conditions. Dr. Chowdhury is co-founder of Habit Change and former director of Wellspring Health at Scripps Memorial Hospital. Currently, she's chief medical officer for New Practices. Her book is The Prime.
After the break, we'll find out how people in India used to eat.
Should we be following their good example? What about other cultures?
Dr. Chowdhury will tell us how she transformed her practice from a traditional neurologist practice to an integrative one and explain what that means.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you're enjoying this People's Pharmacy podcast, why not head over to our website where you'll find a wealth of information on medications, conditions, home remedies, and ways to keep yourself healthy. You'll find it all at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Foot Cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
To order a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1033. That number again is 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're talking about how to integrate a 5,000-year-old healing tradition from India into modern medical practice. Our guest is Kulreet Chowdhury. She's an integrative neurologist with combined expertise in modern neurology and ancient Ayurveda. She's the former director of Wellspring Health at Scripps Memorial Hospital in La Jolla, California, and the co-founder of Habit Change. She's currently Chief Medical Officer for New Practices Incorporated. She's a neuroscientist who has participated as an investigator in more than 20 clinical research studies of conditions including Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, ALS, Parkinson's disease, and diabetic peripheral neuropathy. Her book is The Prime: Prepare and Repair Your Body for Spontaneous Weight Loss. Her website is drkulreetchowdhury.com. You'll find a link to it from our website.
Dr. Chowdhury, you talk a little bit about how people in India, at least in the old days, would generally eat. And you mentioned that the largest meal is in the middle of the day, and that dessert is not like we know it here in the U.S. When you were growing up, it was fruit. It wasn't candy. It wasn't ice cream. It wasn't a lot of sugar.
Right.
And so I'm just curious, why is it so important to have your main meal in the middle of the day and a light meal towards evening?
You know, the basic premise of Ayurvedic medicine is respecting the cycles of nature. And when we go back in time, let's say, 100 to 200 years, we had no choice but to respect the cycles of nature. But then we got electricity and we were able to work longer. And what happened is that we forced our bodies to comply with our technological advances. But as we know, the body doesn't evolve that quickly. When there are changes, we can adapt to them, but it can take, thousands to tens of thousands of years. And so we're in this very unusual place where, normally people would be sleeping as the sun goes down, but now we're working through the night. And so in Ayurvedic medicine, we're basically following the natural circadian rhythms. And one of the forces that influences that rhythm is just the rising and setting of the sun. And so lunch is recommended as the largest meal because in Ayurvedic medicine, it's considered to be the time when your digestion is actually the strongest. And it correlates with the energy of the sun, which is related to digestion. And what we are finding is even when we are studying kind of the changes that happen in individuals, that there is this increase in heat or in metabolic energy at lunchtime. So it's essentially the most efficient time to be eating, and it's when your body does the most with what you've eaten. And there was even studies done on this. You can eat more at lunchtime, so keeping your calories the same throughout the day. You can eat more at lunchtime and lose weight versus eating more of your calories in the evening.
Well, I find it fascinating that you're talking about the traditional Indian pattern of eating with a large midday meal, because it's not just India. I mean, we saw this in Mexico when we were there, where you have your comida in the middle of the day, and then the evening meal is very light. And of course, in many European countries, that used to be the approach, I think much less nowadays. And even in farm families in the U.S., I know in my Midwestern background, the midday meal was when you ate the big meal, and supper was, not quite an afterthought, but pretty close to it.
And that's what I mean by saying, Ayurvedic medicine, it was held, or you can say preserved in India, but it's really knowledge about how to live in a human body, and it's present throughout the world. And this is a great example of that.
Dr. Chowdhury, you changed your practice pretty dramatically from, standard neurology practice that every other neurologist in this country would be very familiar with to something quite different. Can you tell us, what you have done in the last decade or two and what it's like for a patient to visit Dr. Chowdhury's office?
Well, really, I had no choice but to change the way I was practicing medicine, because if I was able to cure my migraine headaches by making lifestyle changes, how could I go back to my patients and then just prescribe the medications that I couldn't tolerate? And so in a very short amount of time, it essentially turned into what we now dub as lifestyle medicine. So instead of having a patient come in, and we'll use migraine headaches as an example, instead of just asking questions about how many headaches do you get, how severe are they, I would ask questions about what are you eating? When are you eating it? How are you preparing your food? How often are you going to the bathroom? What are your sleep patterns like? What is your stress level like? And so I suddenly began to immerse myself into the way that my patients were living. And I really thought initially that I was going to get a lot of kickback from my patients that, we don't want to have to do this much work and we don't want to have to go into this amount of detail. And it was the exact opposite. My patients loved having a physician that was actually partnering with them, that was understanding what was happening in their life. And it was so eye-opening because I could have, 100 different migraine sufferers, but they could have migraine headaches for 100 different reasons. And this goes back to the point of having to personalize medicine. How can you personalize medicine if you don't know who your patients are, if you don't know their stories, if you don't know the lives that they're living? So I essentially just became a better physician and, really became a partner for my patients for their health. And it was remarkable. It was the most fun I had ever had in practicing medicine in my life.
Dr. Chowdhury, I have to admit that when your book was introduced to us, I thought, oh no, not another diet book. And I have to admit that it's not another diet book. You actually talk about dieting in reverse. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to tell us how you help your patients get free from the food addiction that so many of them and the rest of us suffer from. How can we take control of our biochemistry?
Well, I'm so happy that you brought this point out because I never intended to write a diet book, and I never looked at this program as a weight loss program. This was really a program for me. It was for reversing neurodegenerative conditions, so conditions like multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease. And so my intention in creating this program was to put forth something that helped to reduce what I call the toxic inflammation that was leading to brain disease. The unexpected outcome of the program was that people shed pounds. And, this, of course, makes sense because you're normalizing your biochemistry, you're reducing insulin resistance, and these are all things that have a profound effect on the brain. And so when I was first approached with writing the book, I thought the weight loss part was, totally irrelevant, quite honestly, because here people were becoming stable with life-threatening conditions. And the fact that, they lost 20 to 30 pounds to me was like, it was forgivable. I mean, it was something that was like, okay, yes, you did that, but look at what you gained, not at what you lost. And when, when we started to put the book together, what we found, and what I even found in my own practice, was when you tell patients that they're going to do something that will help them to lose weight, they jump on board faster than they do when I tell them that this is going to help, their neurological condition. And so that was really the premise for why we were willing to embrace the weight loss aspect of it. But really what I'm showing people through the program is essentially how to create a smart gut, how to change your microbiome or your gut flora so that you naturally begin to change the way you're eating and you break the addiction cycle, what we refer to as neuroadaptation in the book. You break that cycle where your gut and your brain are dictating what you're eating, not based on what it needs, but because of this abnormal population of bacteria in your GI tract. And it has a direct impact on your brain. And I discuss much of the research around that in the book.
Well, how do you do that? What's the first step?
Well, the first step is really just simply starting to, we describe it in Ayurvedic medicine as opening up the channels in the body. And so in the first step, I give this recipe for the tea, the prime tea, which again, all of this is just stuff that you turn to your kitchen for. The basic the basic assumption in Ayurvedic medicine is food is medicine. So the simple tea that you make with cumin, coriander, and fennel seeds, what is it doing? Well, it's helping to repair your GI lining, which is so important for your healthy bacteria to flourish. It's helping to flush out the toxins through your lymphatic system. And most people don't even know what their lymphatic system is, but it's the garbage disposal system in the body. And if that is backed up, you can't process just the normal toxins that are created just from metabolism. And so we do several steps in the stage 1 just to simply open up those channels. And then in step 2, we break the addiction cycle with food. And we do this by changing the way that dopamine is being secreted when you're eating those unhealthy foods, because what we found even from studies is that some of our junk food is acting like cocaine acts on the brain of an addicted person, that sugar acts the exact same way. So we're basically challenging that addiction cycle in the brain in phase 2. And then in phase 3, I'm introducing things that really help to pull, we use the word toxin. It's so hard to translate from an Ayurvedic standpoint because we don't have the perfect terminology, but it basically pulls the toxins that have been now basically hidden into the organs out into the circulation, into the lymphatic system, into the GI tract. And then in the final step, I'm introducing habits that, and again, we've never once asked anyone to change the way they're eating because it happens naturally, but we introduce habits that are now supportive of this new biochemistry. So habits like meditation. And most people would never think of something like meditation as a key element, not only for weight loss, but for reversing neurological disease.
How does that work?
Well, meditation, if we step back and just look at what is the key component of almost every chronic condition, it's inflammation. It's inflammation in its different forms. And one of the inciting factors of inflammation is what stress does to our bodies. And we've done so many studies on this now over and over. And meditation, by reducing that stress response, helps to reduce the inflammatory cascade in our body. And whereas, taking a medication might help with one pathway in reducing inflammation, meditation is reducing inflammation systemically. And so even in the research looking at meditation, and these research studies in transcendental meditation in particular, but looking at transcendental meditation and the effect it has on blood pressure, it's as effective as medication, so as effective as a pill in reducing blood pressure. And so which would you rather do? Something that is going to, reduce the stress on your body overall, or taking one medication which comes with side effects and is only helping that one little pathway?
Dr. Chowdhury, you write about people with chronic conditions that can be actually reversed through your approach. Diabetes, we understand if you exercise, if you eat correctly, it's conceivable that people with type 2 diabetes might be able to reduce their medication or perhaps even give it up completely. But in the world of neurology, wow, you have some of the most challenging conditions that occur in medicine, whether it's Parkinson's or ALS or MS. You know better than we do how your colleagues struggle with medications to try and just control some of those symptoms. Can you tell us specifically what you do in the field of neurology and how well it works?
Well, this was the biggest shock for me because when I introduced this to my patients, my expectation was, yes, we reverse migraine headaches because I was able to reverse it. But I was really looking at conditions like multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. I was mainly looking that maybe we could improve some of their symptoms and never really looking at reversal at all. I thought that was aiming way too high. And it was just shocking to me that these are actually reversible conditions because I had no basis for believing that. And, it's a very individualized approach. And the program that I outlined in the Prime was the foundational step for almost every single patient. And then we would add other specific unique things depending on their conditions. But, this is not something that is new to the medical research world either. Even Dr. Bredeson's work with Alzheimer's disease, which is just revolutionary, that when you come at people in multiple different areas, meaning multiple different habits. So looking at diet, looking at stress reduction, looking at replacing key nutrients that are missing, you can reverse even some of the most seemingly daunting conditions, such as early Alzheimer's disease. So we really have to change the way that we look at the brain, and we have to look at it as part of being, one part of a bigger picture, of a bigger inflammatory process that is happening in the body. And as you reverse that, the brain has this amazing ability of plasticity and the ability to repair itself.
What an optimistic note for us to close on. Dr. Kulreet Chowdhury, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
This was such a joy. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Dr. Kulreet Chowdhury. She's an integrative neurologist with combined expertise in modern neurology and ancient Ayurveda. She's the former director of Wellspring Health at Scripps Memorial Hospital and the co-founder of Habit Change. She's currently Chief Medical Officer for New Practices, Inc. She's a neuroscientist who has participated as an investigator in more than 20 clinical research studies of conditions including Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, ALS, Parkinson's disease, and diabetic peripheral neuropathy.
Her book is The Prime, Prepare and Repair Your Body for Spontaneous Weight Loss. Her website is drkulreetchowdhury.com. It's spelled Drkulreetchowdhury.com. And if that was just too much spelling, you'll find a link to it from our website.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski is the engineer. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The number is 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
To order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1033. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit the site, you can check out information on prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. Share your own experience. Have you used Ayurveda for your own healing? Tell us about it. And don't miss our listen and read offer of Dr. Chowdhury's book, The Prime, together with the CD of this interview.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to the People's Pharmacy.